Sarah Whitfield's son was starving, and the town of Cedar Ridge was about to make her pay for it. It was 1873, and hope was a currency scarcer than gold in the Wyoming Territory. Sarah and 6-year-old Thomas lived in a shack that was more gaps than walls, a place respectable folks pretended didn't exist. Just 18 months ago, she'd been a wife. Jacob Whitfield's wife. He was a good man, a miner who chased silver dreams until the mountain decided to fall on him. One poorly timed blast, and Sarah was a widow at 23. Now watching the morning sun slice through the walls, she saw the bars of light fall across her son's back. His ribs were like a tiny washboard under his threadbare shirt. His father's sandy hair, his father's stubborn chin. But hunger had taken the rest. Her own stomach was a familiar, hollow ache. But the twisting in her gut wasn't for herself. It was for the boy who would wake up soon, in the empty cornmeal sack that was her only answer. She stepped outside. The town was already alive with judgment. Mrs. Henderson, the store owner's wife, saw her and turned away, her nose wrinkled in disgust. A widow without a man was a problem. A widow in debt was a stain. And Sarah was deep in debt. Jacob's debt, the mine company called it, for tools he'd used, for lodging he'd slept in. The numbers kept growing, a phantom ledger that haunted her every step. The good people of Cedar Ridge had long memories for debt and short ones for mercy. "Morning, Mrs. Whitfield." The voice was slick, like oil on water. Samuel Morrison, the bank manager. He stood beside a buggy so black it seemed to suck the light out of the air. His smile was thin, a crack in a cold face. "Mr. Morrison," she nodded, "I trust you've given thought to my offer." His eyes crawled over her, making her feel as threadbare as her dress. He'd offered her a job. Cleaning, he'd called it, at his establishment. The pay was negotiable. She knew what he meant. She'd seen the way he looked at women who had run out of choices. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Morrison, but I must decline." His face went hard. "Pride's a luxury you can't afford. How long before that boy of yours starts looking more skeleton than child?" The words were a slap. She wanted to scream, to claw at that smug face. But she kept her voice level, a small, cold stone. "Good day, Mr. Morrison." She walked away, his eyes burning into her back. The day stretched on, each closed door another nail in her coffin. No work at the big houses, no laundry to wash, no hope. By afternoon, Thomas was awake. He didn't complain. He'd learned that complaining didn't make food appear. But she saw him press a small hand to his belly. She saw him lick his lips as they passed Drummond's bakery. The smell was a physical assault. Fresh bread, sweet and warm. It promised life, and it was a promise she couldn't keep. Thomas tugged her hand. "It smells good, Mama." "Yes, sweetheart, it does." She looked down at his hollow cheeks, at the trusting eyes that were starting to look too big for his face. And in that moment, something inside her didn't just crack, it shattered. Her last ounce of pride, the final wall between who she was and what she was about to become, crumbled into dust. "Wait here," she told Thomas, and walked toward the bakery door. The bell chimed, a bright, cheerful sound that felt like a mockery. Robert Drummond looked up. He was a big man, his stomach straining against a gold watch chain. He frowned as if she'd dragged in the dirt from the street. "Mrs. Whitfield," her voice was a whisper. "Mr. Drummond, I've come to ask—" "I don't extend credit," he said flatly, "especially not to your kind." "I'm not asking for credit." She forced herself to meet his cold eyes. "I'm asking for mercy. My boy hasn't eaten in 2 days. Just one loaf. The old bread. The kind you throw to the pigs." She hated the word that came next. "Please." Drummond's face reddened. "Whatever you think of me, he's innocent." "Innocent?" The baker scoffed. "No child born to debt is innocent. You should have thought of that before your husband got himself killed. Before a mountain fell on him," she shot back, her voice rising, "while he was making men like you rich." "Keep your voice down," he hissed. "I run a respectable establishment." The bell chimed again. Mrs. Patterson, the town's chief gossip, walked in. She stopped short, her eyes landing on Sarah like a vulture spotting a carcass. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with poison. "I didn't realize you served everyone." Sarah could see Thomas through the window, still waiting, his small shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of her. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Just one small loaf. For the boy." Something flickered in Drummond's eyes. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was just annoyance. He reached under the counter, pulled out a small cloth-wrapped bundle, and shoved it at her. "Take it and go, and don't come back." Her hands shook as she took it. It was hard as a rock, but it was food. "Thank you." "I said go," he roared. "If I catch you begging in here again, I'll call the constable. We have laws against vagrancy in this town." She fled, the bell mocking her retreat. Out on the street, faces turned to watch. She grabbed Thomas's hand and hurried away, their stares like hot brands on her skin. Behind her, she heard Mrs. Patterson's sharp voice. "Disgraceful. These people have no shame." And Drummond's reply, heavy with self-importance. "Don't worry, she won't trouble respectable folk again. I can promise you that." Back in the shack, she unwrapped the bundle. The bread was stale, hard enough to crack a tooth, but Thomas fell on it like a wolf, gnawing at the crust with a desperate hunger that tore her apart. Watching him, a cold dread settled in her heart. Drummond's promise wasn't just a threat, it was a guarantee. She had walked right into his trap. The next dawn was gray and cold, a perfect match for the dread in Sarah's bones. Thomas had eaten the last crumb of stale bread, and now he lay listless, his trust in her a weight she could barely carry. "Mama will be back soon," she whispered, a lie that tasted like ash. She had to try again. She couldn't go to Morrison, not yet, but she had to do something. At the general store, Mr. Henderson was sweeping the walkway. He saw her coming, and his face soured. "No credit, Mrs. Whitfield." "I'm seeking work, Mr. Henderson. I have all the help I need." He turned his back on her. Dismissed. It was the same everywhere she went. The millinery, the livery, the telegraph office. The doors closed in her face, one after another. She was marked, tainted, a walking reminder of what happened when luck ran out. By noon, desperation had its claws in her. It dragged her back toward the bakery. She stood across the street, a ghost watching the living come and go with their parcels and their full bellies. She saw Drummond laughing with Mrs. Morrison inside. The sight filled her with a helpless rage. Her feet moved on their own, carrying her across the street toward that cheerful, mocking bell. The moment she stepped inside, Drummond's face contorted with fury. It was a practiced rage, too quick, too perfect. He'd been waiting for this. "You dare show your face here again?" "Mr. Drummond, please," she begged, knowing it was useless. "I'll work. I'll scrub your ovens. Anything." "Get out," he boomed, for the benefit of the two other customers who shrank back in theatrical shock. "I warned you." He moved with surprising speed for a big man, grabbing her arm in a bruising grip. He was already hauling her to the door. "Chester," he yelled at his young assistant, "run, fetch Constable Murphy. Tell him we have a vagrant disturbing the peace." "Please, I'll go," she cried, but he held her fast. "Oh, there's need, all right," he snarled, his breath hot and sour. "This town's got laws. It's time you learned to respect them." Constable Murphy arrived so fast it was clear he'd been waiting nearby. He was a lean man with a waxed mustache and eyes as cold as a banker's heart. And he wasn't alone. Behind him came Mr. Morrison and Judge Carlton, and several other men from the town council. It wasn't an arrest. It was a parade. They had planned this, every last second of it. "Caught her begging again," Drummond announced, still gripping her arm. "Disturbing my customers. Refusing to leave." Murphy nodded slowly, ticking off charges on his fingers. "Vagrancy. Disturbing the peace. Public nuisance." He paused, his cold eyes scanning the crowd that was gathering, drawn by the drama. "That's jail time. But maybe the good people of Cedar Ridge would prefer a more immediate lesson." A murmur went through the crowd. Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew what he meant. "I have a child," she cried, her voice raw with panic. "A 6-year-old boy. What happens to him?" Should have thought of that before you chose this life, Mrs. Patterson sniffed from the crowd. My husband died and you're mine, Sarah screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Morrison and the judge. He died making you rich. Your husband died owing money, Morrison corrected coldly. His debts didn't die with him. The crowd was a monster now, feeding on her humiliation. They pressed closer, their faces a blur of righteousness and morbid curiosity. Take her to the square, Judge Carlton ordered. Murphy produced a pair of iron shackles. The metal was cold and heavy against her wrists. They dragged her out of the bakery, the crowd parting before them. The town square was just a dusty patch of ground with a hitching post, but it was about to become her stage. Her legs shook as Murphy chained her to the post. The crowd formed a half circle, eager for the show to begin. Then she heard a cry. Mama! She twisted her head, her heart seizing in her chest. Thomas. He was pushing through the legs of the adults, his face a mask of white terror. Rough hands grabbed him, holding him back. 20 lashes, Judge Carlton announced, his voice booming with authority, as prescribed by town ordinance for repeat vagrancy. 20. The word was a death sentence. Dr. Marcus, the town physician, stepped forward. Judge, that's excessive. The woman is unwell. The law is the law, doctor, the judge cut him off. Unless you'd care to join her. Dr. Marcus fell silent, his face etched with shame. Murphy uncoiled a long leather strap. He tested its weight, swinging it once through the air. It made a sickening sound like a whip cracking. The first blow stole the air from her lungs. It was a white-hot line of fire across her back. One! Someone in the crowd yelled. The second strike landed, then the third. Through the searing pain, she could hear Thomas screaming her name, his cries tearing her apart more than the lash itself. By the 10th lash, her dress was in tatters. The crowd had grown quieter, the initial excitement replaced by a grim, focused attention. 15, she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Please don't hurt her anymore. Thomas sobbed. Please. She forced her eyes open, found him in the crowd. It's all right, she mouthed, a lie that burned worse than the leather. The 18th lash tore a scream from her throat. Her legs gave out, and she hung from the shackles, the metal biting into her wrists. 19. Just one more. She could survive one more. That's when she saw him. Standing at the very edge of the crowd, a figure that didn't belong. He was a mountain of a man, dressed in buckskin and fur, his face hidden behind a wild beard and a mane of dark hair. He stood perfectly still, but it was the stillness of a predator, coiled and ready to spring. The 20th lash fell. Silence descended on the square. Murphy stepped back, coiling his strap. Let that be a lesson, he announced. Cedar Ridge is a lawful town. Sarah hung limp, every breath in agony. The crowd began to break up, their entertainment over. But the mountain man hadn't moved. He stood like a statue carved from granite and fury, his eyes fixed on the scene. Then Constable Murphy made his final mistake. Flushed with power, he strode over and grabbed Thomas by the collar. As for the boy, he said with a cruel smirk, perhaps a few nights in a cell will teach him what becomes of a beggar's brat. And that's when the statue came to life. The mountain man moved through the crowd, not like a person, but like a force of nature. People scrambled out of his way without even thinking about it. Up close, he was even bigger than he looked, a giant clad in wolf pelts and worn leather, with shoulders as broad as an axe handle. His name was Ezra Thorne, though few knew it. To the people of Cedar Ridge, he was a ghost story, a wild man who came down from the high country twice a year to trade pelts for powder and lead. They said he was a savage, more animal than man. They had no idea how right they were. Ezra had watched the whole thing. The jeering crowd, the self-righteous baker, the woman's quiet dignity breaking under the lash. He'd seen men do terrible things in the war, things that made this look like a church social. But this was different. This was cruelty dressed up as law, malice disguised as order. It stirred a cold, black rage in him. He thought the mountain winters had frozen long ago. And now the constable had his hand on the boy. Ezra's mind went quiet. His body just moved. Release the child. His voice was a low growl, rough from disuse, like stones grinding together. Murphy spun around. his hand instinctively going to his gun. "This is town business, mountain man. Move along before you get hurt." Ezra didn't move. He just stood there, his stillness more threatening than any shout. The remaining crowd grew silent, sensing a new kind of storm about to break. "I said, release him." Murphy's face flushed. "You dare give orders to a constable? I could arrest you for interfering." "You could try." The words were spoken softly, but they echoed across the silent square. Everyone knew the stories about Ezra Thorne, that he'd killed a grizzly with just a knife, that he could track a whisper through a blizzard. Stories had power, and right now the story of Ezra Thorne was more powerful than any tin badge. Judge Carlton pushed forward. "Now see here. This is a matter of law. You have no standing." "I have eyes," Ezra cut him off, his gaze sweeping over the judge, the baker, the banker. "I see a woman beaten for being hungry. I see fat men counting out lashes like they were coins. And now I see a coward in a badge laying hands on a child." He took one step forward. Murphy's hand tightened on his gun, but he didn't draw it. He wasn't a fool. Ezra's Sharps rifle was slung over his shoulder, and a mountain man could hit a running rabbit at 300 yards. "The boy comes with me," Ezra said. It wasn't a request. "The woman, too, once you cut her loose." "Absolutely not!" Drummond the baker had found his courage again. "That woman is a vagrant, a criminal." Ezra's hand moved. It was a blur. One moment it was empty, the next it held a Bowie knife the size of a man's forearm. The blade glittered in the afternoon sun. He didn't point it. He didn't have to. "You were saying?" Drummond's words choked in his throat. He stumbled back, his face as white as his own flour. The square was dead silent. Dr. Marcus was the one who broke the spell. "For God's sake, cut her down. Whatever your laws say, she's a human being." The judge, seeing his authority crumbling, gave a curt nod to Murphy. The constable, eager to be out of Ezra's sights, unlocked the shackles. Sarah collapsed. But she didn't hit the ground. Ezra was there, moving with that same impossible speed, catching her as if she weighed nothing. "Mama!" Thomas cried, rushing to her side. "I'm all right," she whispered, though the blood soaking her torn dress told a different story. Ezra shrugged off his heavy wolf pelt cloak and wrapped it gently around her. Then he stood, a living wall between the broken woman and the town that had broken her. "Anyone else got something to say about vagrants?" he growled. No one did. He bent and lifted Sarah into his arms. "Boy," he said to Thomas, "stay close." "Where do you think you're taking them?" the judge demanded, his voice thin and reedy. Ezra paused, looking back over his shoulder. His eyes were like chips of a winter sky. "Away from here," he said, "unless you'd like to stop me." His free hand rested on the hilt of his knife. No one moved, no one spoke. He walked away from them, the crowd parting like water before a ship's prow. Thomas trotted beside him, his small hand clutching the edge of Ezra's buckskin shirt. Behind them, the town finally found its voice, erupting in angry, confused shouts. Drummond was yelling about forming a posse. Someone laughed. "You go after him, Bob. We'll say nice things at your funeral." Ezra didn't hear them. He was focused on the woman in his arms, her breathing shallow and ragged. He had acted on pure instinct, a rage he hadn't felt in 10 years. A decade spent in the mountains, trying to escape the violence of men. And here he was, wading right back into it. He reached his pack mule, Belle, and gently laid Sarah across the saddle. "What's your name, boy?" "Thomas, sir. Thomas Whitfield." "Can you walk? It's a ways to where we're going." Thomas straightened his thin shoulders. "I can walk." Ezra looked at the boy, all bony knees and fierce eyes, and saw a flicker of something he recognized. Survival. "Good man," he said, handing him a piece of jerked venison from his possible sack. "Name's Ezra. No need for sir." As they started up the trail leading into the high country, Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just sealed his own fate. He was a rescuer now, responsible for a battered woman and a half-starved child. The mountains ahead were vast and unforgiving. Winter was on its way. Sarah stirred on the mule, her eyes fluttering open. She tried to focus on his face. "Why?" she whispered. It was a fair question. Why had he done it? Why shatter 10 years of solitude for a stranger? He thought about the war. He thought about the look on the baker's face. He thought about the boy's terrified screams. Because someone had to, he said. It was the only answer he had. Her eyes closed again, but her hand found his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't answer. He just led the mule higher up the trail, away from the stench of civilization. In the distance, a wolf howled, a long, lonely cry, a sound of freedom. Ezra almost smiled. He and the wolves, they understood each other. They knew that sometimes the only justice you got in this world was the kind you took for yourself. The silence Ezra left behind in Cedar Ridge was heavier than any shout. The crowd stood frozen, staring at the dust settling on the trail he'd taken, half expecting the mountain to swallow him whole. Judge Carlton, his face pale, tried to regain control. "I trust we've all learned a valuable lesson about order," he announced, but his voice shook. The crowd wasn't listening. It was splintering, breaking into angry, guilty little knots. 20 lashes, a woman whispered to her friend, her hand covering her mouth, "for a loaf of bread." "The law's the law," Mrs. Patterson snapped back, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Near the hitching post, Drummond the baker was ranting at Constable Murphy. "We can't let him get away with this. He defied the law. He threatened me." "You want to follow him into those mountains, Bob?" a man from the feed store asked with a nervous laugh. "That's his church. He could pick us off from a mile away, and we'd never see it coming." "So we just let him take her?" Dr. Marcus, who'd been quietly packing his bag, spoke up. "He took a woman you were about to let bleed to death in the dust, Robert. Let's call it what it was. She was warned." "Yes," the doctor said wearily. "She was a mother, desperate to feed her child. Maybe if one of us had offered her a day's wages instead of a whipping—" "I offered her employment," the banker Morrison cut in. "She was too proud to take it." Dr. Marcus turned a long, cold stare on him. "We all know what kind of employment you offer women with no choices, Samuel." Morrison's face went dark. I dare state the truth." The argument was escalating until a new voice cut through the noise like a cold wind. "No." Everyone turned. Marshal John Hartley stood at the edge of the square. He was an older man, tough as boiled leather, with eyes that had seen everything and were impressed by nothing. He'd been out of town, but news traveled fast, and the marshal had heard. "Marshal," the judge said carefully, "we had a situation here." "I heard," Hartley's voice was dry as dust, "heard you beat a widow half to death for the crime of being hungry, and a mountain man took exception." "She was a vagrant." "Save it, Judge." Hartley walked through the crowd, which parted for him like he was the Grim Reaper. He stopped over the dark stains by the hitching post. 20 lashes, he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the square. "And you all watched. Good God-fearing folk?" He turned, his eyes sweeping over them. "The law," Murphy began weakly. "I know the law, Chester," Hartley said. "I also know when it's being used as a club by men with full bellies against those with empty ones." "That mountain man threatened me," Drummond blustered. "Are you going to arrest him?" Hartley looked at Drummond up and down. "Way I hear it, he told you to stop threatening a beaten woman. If that makes you feel unsafe, maybe you should ask yourself why." "This is an outrage. You're supposed to uphold the law," Morrison sputtered. "I am," Hartley said calmly. "The woman's been punished. More than enough. The matter's closed. As for Ezra Thorne, yes, I know his name. He removed a problem from your town. Seems to me you should thank him." "Thank him? He defied us. He stopped you from throwing a 6-year-old boy in a jail cell," Hartley shot back. "Is that what passes for justice here now? Locking up children?" The banker went silent. The marshal wasn't finished. He fixed Morrison with a stare that could chip stone. "Tell me, Samuel, how much did Jacob Whitfield really owe on that mine loan? And how much interest have you tacked on since he died? Creative accounting? Is that what they call it?" Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. No words came out. Hartley nodded. "Thought so. You all had a hand in this. You turned her away, you pushed her to desperation, then you punished her for it. And now you want to hunt down the one man who showed her a shred of decency? He spat in the dust. There will be no posse. Ezra Thorne earned his place in those mountains. He took in the people you threw away. As far as I'm concerned, that makes him more civilized than anyone standing here. The crowd began to melt away, the anger replaced by something heavier. Shame. As the square emptied, the judge approached the marshal. You're making a mistake, John. You can't let people think they can just ignore the law. Hartley stared at him. The only people ignoring the law today were the ones using it to justify cruelty. The mountain man didn't break the law. He reminded you what it's supposed to be for. High in the mountains, Ezra Thorne pushed onward, unaware of the war of conscience he'd started in the town below. He was just a man trying to outrun his own ghosts, who had just run headlong into someone else's. He had to make camp. Sarah was fading, the fever from her wounds starting to burn. He found a sheltered hollow beneath ancient pines and, with practiced ease, set about his work. He laid her gently on his own bedroll, the fur still warm. Thomas hadn't let go of her hand. He watched Ezra with wide, terrified eyes. Is she going to be all right? He whispered. Ezra looked at Sarah's face, flushed with fever in the firelight. Your mama's strong, he said. It wasn't an answer. He pulled out the supplies the doctor had given them. I need to clean these wounds. It's going to hurt her. Thomas nodded, his small face grim. I can help. Ezra carefully cut away the ruined fabric of her dress. He sucked in a breath. The constable's work had been brutal. The lash marks were a bloody map of cruelty. Animals, he muttered. Then he caught himself. No, animals didn't do this. Only men did. Thomas returned with cold water from a stream. Together, by the light of the fire, they tended to Sarah's wounds. Ezra's massive hands were surprisingly gentle. Thomas held the cloth, whispering to his unconscious mother. You're brave, boy, Ezra told him. As brave as any man. Thomas straightened a little. Papa said a man takes care of his family. Your papa was right. After they finished, Ezra gave the boy the last of his food. Thomas ate slowly, his eyes never leaving his mother's face. Tell me about the mountains, Thomas said, desperate to fill the terrible silence. Are there really bears as big as houses? Ezra managed a slight smile. Big enough, but it's the civilized folk you have to watch out for, as you saw today. Sarah moaned, her eyes fluttering open. She saw Ezra, her gaze struggling to focus. Why? She whispered again. This time, he had a better answer. He'd been thinking about it all the way up the trail. Because watching them hurt you, it brought back memories I've spent 10 years trying to forget. Her eyes cleared for a moment. You were a soldier. It wasn't a question. He nodded. A long time ago. My brother. He was at Antietam, she said, a tear rolling down her cheek. He came back. Different. He couldn't be around people. He just went west. We never heard from him again. Maybe he found some peace, Ezra said quietly. The mountains are good for that. Her hand found his, her grip weak. We can't be a burden to you. When I'm better, we'll go. Go where? He asked. Back to that town? You think any other town will be different? He saw the despair in her eyes and made a decision. There's a cabin, an old trapper's place. It needs work, but it's solid. You and the boy can winter there. We have nothing to pay you with. I'm not asking for payment, he said gruffly. I'm just a man who remembers what it's like to need help and not find it. He watched her drift back into a fevered sleep. The boy Thomas hadn't moved from his post. She's going to make it, isn't she? The boy asked. She has you to fight for, Ezra said. That counts for a lot. He settled against a tree, his rifle across his lap. He and the boy kept watch together as the stars wheeled across the black sky. In the small hours of the morning, Sarah's fever finally broke. As dawn painted the sky, Ezra allowed himself a moment of rest. He had gotten them this far. He had taken on this burden. But as he looked at the sleeping woman and her fiercely loyal son, he realized with a shock that it didn't feel like a burden at all. It felt like a beginning, and that scared him more than any army. Back in Cedar Ridge, the shame Marshal Hartley had served up for breakfast had soured in the bellies of the town's most powerful men. In his office, Samuel Morrison paced like a caged wolf, the Whitfield ledger open on his desk. The numbers were legal. The interest, the fees. all perfectly legal. But legality wasn't the same as righteousness, and Hartley's accusations had stuck a knife in the town's conscience. It wasn't just shame either, it was fear. The story was spreading. People were talking. The town was dividing. At the schoolhouse, Benjamin Garrett, the young teacher, posed a question to his class. How do we define civilized behavior? Is it following rules even when they cause harm? Or is it showing mercy? William Morrison, the banker's son, parroted his father. Without law and order, we'd have chaos. Perhaps, Garrett replied, but yesterday we saw law and order used to beat a hungry woman, and we saw one man stand against it. Which of those actions made our town better? The children had no answer, but their parents did. A small group gathered at the marshal's office. It was a strange collection. Dr. Marcus, Reverend Stevens, his face lined with guilt, the teacher Garrett, Tom Chen, the laundryman, and Abigail Foster, one of the women who had looked away in the square. This a posse? Hartley asked, his eyes hard. This is an apology, the Reverend said. We failed that family. We want to help make it right. Hartley looked them over. Ezra Thorne ain't known for his hospitality. You know him? Dr. Marcus asked. Knew him in the war, Hartley said. Good man. Saw too much. Something broke in him near the end. Sent him up here looking for a piece he never found. The marshal pulled out a rough map. If you're serious, this is where you'll likely find him. But you go peaceful, and if he tells you to leave, you leave. A man's got a right to his solitude. They gathered supplies, food, blankets, medicine, things the town should have offered Sarah weeks ago. But not everyone was feeling charitable. Fools! Morrison spat when he heard of it. Bleeding hearts, undermining the very foundations of this town. Built on what, Mr. Morrison? His own clerk, a young man named Theodore, asked quietly. Fear? Debt that can never be repaid? You're fired, Morrison roared. Gladly, Theodore replied, gathering his things. I've been keeping your books, sir. I know exactly how a $40 loan becomes $200. I know how you cheat men who can't read the contracts they're signing. He walked out, his head held high. The battle lines were being drawn. The town was ripping itself in two. One side, led by men like Morrison and Drummond, clung to their harsh, brittle version of order. The other, ashamed and newly awakened, sought to make amends. The morning mist was still thick on the pines when the riders found Ezra's camp. He was waiting for them, the click of his rifle hammer, the only welcome they got. That's far enough, his voice echoed from the rocks. State your business. Ezra Thorne, Dr. Marcus called out, his hands raised. I've come to check on Mrs. Whitfield's wounds. Ezra emerged from the shadows, his rifle held loosely but ready. His storm gray eyes sized them up. Bit late for doctoring, isn't it? Yes, the doctor admitted, but not too late, I hope. Ezra's gaze moved to the others. We've brought supplies, Tom Chen said, to make amends. Amends? Ezra's voice was full of contempt. You can't amend 20 lashes with a sack of flour. No, Reverend Stevens said, but we can try to do better. We failed. As neighbors, as Christians, we were cowards. The brutal honesty of the confession seemed to soften something in Ezra. She's fevered, he said. If you can truly help her, then come. But know this, any threat to them, and you'll find out why the Ute avoid this territory. He led them to the camp. Sarah lay on a bed of pine boughs, her face flushed. Thomas sat beside her, a small, fierce guardian. The doctor went to work immediately. Infection, he confirmed. But we caught it in time. She'll recover. As he cleaned and stitched the wounds, Sarah cried out. Thomas was instantly at her side, holding her hand. I'm here, Mama. You gotta be strong. The others unloaded the supplies. Thomas's eyes went wide at the sight of so much food. Flour, sugar, salted meat, coffee, a king's ransom. You should know, the Reverend told Ezra quietly. Not everyone in town agrees with this. Morrison, Drummond, they're angry. They see you as a threat. Men like that mistake their comfort for God's blessing, Ezra said, his voice hard. I knew their type in the war. They send others to die while they count their profits. As the doctor finished, Garrett, the teacher, approached Thomas. I've brought some books. A boy's education shouldn't stop, even in the mountains. Thomas looked at him, his eyes old with suspicion. You were there, in the square. You watched. Garrett met his gaze without flinching. Yes, I did, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. I was a coward. I can't change what I didn't do yesterday. I can only try to do better today. Thomas considered this. Finally, he gave a single, solemn nod. Thank you for the books. Before the visitors left, the doctor pulled Ezra aside. Morrison was trying to form a posse. Hartley shut it down, but he's not going to let this go. He can't. You challenged his power in front of the whole town. Let him come, Ezra said. I'd rather prevent bloodshed, the doctor replied. That boy has seen enough. Ezra's jaw tightened. The doctor was right. Stay up here for now, Marcus advised. Let things cool down. Maybe in time, an accommodation can be reached. Men like Morrison don't accommodate, Ezra said. They destroy. After they were gone, the camp was quiet, surrounded by the bounty from the town. A peace offering. Or maybe, Ezra thought, just conscience money. Mr. Ezra, Thomas asked, do you trust them? Ezra thought for a long moment. I trust the doctor wants to heal. The teacher regrets his cowardice. The rest, we'll see. But they might bring trouble. The angry ones might follow their trail back here. Are you scared? Ezra looked down at the boy. Your papa was a wise man, Thomas. Being scared is fine. It's what you do next that matters. He put a hand on the boy's shoulder. Tomorrow I'll start teaching you how to move quiet, how to read a track. A man needs to know how to protect his family. The boy's face lit up. As evening fell, Ezra stood watch, looking down the mountain toward the twinkling lights of Cedar Ridge. He had wanted solitude. Instead, he was now a guardian, a protector, in the center of a storm that was about to break over the entire town. He wasn't just hiding from his past anymore. He was building a future, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that men like Samuel Morrison would do anything to tear it down. The weeks that followed were a quiet rebellion. While Cedar Ridge simmered with resentment and guilt, life in the high country found a new rhythm. Ezra, Sarah, and Thomas became a unit, a small tribe bound by shared trauma and a fierce will to survive. They moved to the old trapper's cabin, a solid little structure tucked into a hidden valley. They patched the roof, chinked the logs, and turned it from a derelict shelter into a home. Thomas transformed. The hollows in his cheeks filled out. He shadowed Ezra everywhere, his mind a sponge for mountain lore. He learned to set a snare, to read the clouds, to move through the forest without a sound. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a quiet confidence. Sarah healed too, in body and in spirit. The lash scars on her back faded to pale lines, but the steel they'd forged in her soul remained. She learned to cook venison over an open fire, to identify edible roots, to stitch buckskin with an awl and sinew. She became as much a part of the mountain as the pines and the granite. One evening, sitting by the fire, she finally asked the question that hung between them. You've given us a home, Ezra. Protection, hope. But what have we given you? He stared into the flames for a long time. You reminded me why some things are worth fighting for, he said, his voice rough. For 10 years I've been hiding from the man I was in the war. But you too, you make me want to be a man again. Thomas, who had been listening, looked up from the arrow he was fletching. Are we a family now? He asked with a child's simple, devastating honesty. Ezra looked at Sarah. In her eyes, he saw the same fragile hope that was taking root in his own chest. He reached out and took her hand. I've been alone a long time, my son, he said. But for you two, I'd like to try. Thomas let out a whoop of pure joy. Does this mean I can call you Pa? The word hit Ezra like a physical blow, cracking open a part of his heart he thought had died in a muddy field in Georgia. If you want to, boy, he managed to say, his throat tight. If you want to. It was a fragile peace, and they all knew it. The warning came a few days later, carried by a band of Ute hunters who moved through the valley like smoke. White men from below, their leader told Ezra. They look for you. Angry faces. Ezra had known this was coming. Morrison couldn't let the challenge stand. He had to reassert his power or lose it forever. The riders appeared 3 days later. It wasn't a town posse. This was different. There were 10 of them, hard-faced men who were not from Cedar Ridge. They carried new rifles and wore their guns tied down low. These were hired men, killers. And leading them was not Morrison, but Constable Murphy, his face a mask of smug revenge. "Sarah, take the boy inside," Ezra said, his voice calm as he checked the action on his sharps. "No," she said, stepping to his side. "We face this together." He looked at her. The timid, beaten woman from the square was gone. In her place stood someone he was only just getting to know. Someone with a spine of iron. "All right," he nodded, "but Thomas stays behind us." They stood before the cabin, a small family of 3 against a small army. "Ezra Thorne," Murphy called out, stopping his horse just out of easy rifle range. "I have a warrant. You're harboring a fugitive from justice. That woman owes debts to the Bank of Cedar Ridge." Before Ezra could answer, Sarah stepped forward. "By whose law, Mr. Murphy?" Her voice rang out, clear and strong. "The law that let you beat me for asking for bread? The law that let Mr. Morrison charge my dead husband 10 times what he owed? That law has no authority here." "Now see here, woman." Drummond, who was with them, began to bluster. "No, you see here, Mr. Drummond." She cut him off. "I asked you for work. You refused. I asked you for stale bread. You had me whipped. You ride up here with hired guns to collect a phantom debt from a widow and her son. You talk of law and justice? There is more justice in a wolf's howl than in your entire town." She stepped back beside Ezra. The 3 of them stood as one. Murphy's hand drifted toward his gun. "Don't be a fool, Thorne. There's 10 of us." "That would be a mistake, Chester," Ezra said, his voice dangerously soft. "You see, you brought 10 men, but you forgot to count." "Count what?" Murphy sneered. "The Ute," Ezra said. "They don't take kindly to armed strangers in their hunting grounds. There's about 6 of them on that ridge to your left, another 5 in the trees behind you." The hired guns shifted nervously in their saddles, their eyes darting to the silent ridgelines. "And you forgot to count her," Ezra continued, nodding toward Sarah. "She's holding a loaded scattergun under that blanket. And you forgot to count the boy. He's got my old Colt revolver in the cabin window, and he's a surprisingly good shot." Ezra raised his own rifle. "My first bullet goes to you, Murphy. The Ute will take care of the rest. That how you want this to end?" Silence. The wind whispered through the pines. The hired guns looked at Murphy, their confidence gone. This wasn't the easy job they'd been paid for. "This isn't over," Murphy snarled, but his voice was thin. He wheeled his horse around. "You can't hide up here forever." As they rode away, defeated and humiliated, Thomas asked, "Pa, were the Ute really there?" Ezra looked at Sarah and allowed himself a small, grim smile. "No, but they were." Suddenly, from the ridgeline, a new group of riders appeared. But these weren't Ute. It was Marshal Hartley, and behind him, a dozen deputized men from Cedar Ridge, the ones who had chosen a side. The doctor, the teacher, the laundryman, even the clerk Morrison had fired. "Looks like you had it handled," Hartley called out, a grin on his weathered face. "But we figured we'd come up and make sure." He looked at the trail the hired guns had taken. "Don't worry, they won't get far." It turned out Theodore, the fired clerk, hadn't just walked away. He'd taken a copy of Morrison's secret ledger with him, the one that detailed all his crooked loans, all the families he'd ruined. He took it straight to Marshal Hartley. The town had finally seen the truth. The law wasn't the problem. The men who twisted it were. Hartley and his men rode off, not to hunt Ezra, but to arrest Samuel Morrison and Chester Murphy for conspiracy, fraud, and hiring gunmen. Justice, it turned out, had finally come to Cedar Ridge. Not with a lash, but with a ledger. As the first snows of winter began to fall, sealing the valley in a blanket of white, the 3 of them stood outside their cabin, their home. Sarah leaned her head on Ezra's shoulder. Thomas stood between them, holding both their hands. In the distance, a wolf howled. It wasn't a sound of loneliness anymore. It was the sound of the wild, a world that was harsh but honest, a world where they belonged. They had all been broken. Sarah by grief and cruelty, Thomas by hunger and fear, Ezra by a war that had scoured his soul. But here together, in the heart of the mountains, they had taken the broken pieces and built something new. something strong, something whole. They had built a family. Thank you all for listening to this tale from the Wild West. Where are you enjoying this story from today? I'd love to hear from listeners around the world. Drop a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Sarah, Ezra, and young Thomas's journey. Your comments and stories mean the world to us.